The air shimmered with an electric tension as the alien warrior woman stepped forward, her every movement a symphony of precision and power. She was unlike anything the human soldier had ever encountered. Her form both familiar and otherworldly, like a sculpture carved from living starlight. Her skin gleamed with an iridescent sheen that shifted colors under the dim red sun of this foreign planet. Each step she took seemed to resonate through the ground beneath his feet, sending subtle tremors up his legs. The armor she wore appeared organic rather than forged, its surface rippling faintly as though it breathed in tandem with her. Strange glyphs glowed softly along its edges, pulsing in rhythm with what he could only assume was her heartbeat, or perhaps something more primal. Her eyes locked onto him, twin pools of liquid silver that seemed to pierce straight through his soul. They weren't just looking at him, they were dissecting him, analyzing every inch of his being. He felt exposed, vulnerable, stripped down to his core by their unrelenting gaze. Her lips curled into a smirk, one corner lifting slightly higher than the other, exuding an arrogance so potent it filled the space between them like smoke. It wasn't mere confidence, it was certainty, absolute and unwavering. "You can't last a minute against me, human," she declared, her voice resonating deep within his chest, bypassing his ears entirely. It carried no malice but instead radiated an almost clinical disdain, as if she were stating a simple fact rather than issuing a challenge. Every word dripped with authority, each syllable heavy enough to weigh down even the strongest resolve. Yet there was something else lurking beneath her tone. Amusement? Curiosity? Whatever it was, it made his stomach churn. The human soldier stood rooted to the spot, his body rigid despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His military training screamed at him to act, to raise his weapon, to retaliate, to do something. But something about her presence froze him in place. Perhaps it was the sheer impossibility of her existence, or maybe it was the way her aura pressed against him, not physically but spiritually, as though she existed on a plane beyond comprehension. Whatever it was, he couldn't move. Not yet. She tilted her head slightly, studying him as one might examine an insect pinned to a board. Her expression didn't soften, nor did it harden. It remained perfectly composed, unreadable save for the faint glimmer of superiority dancing in her eyes. Slowly, deliberately, she extended one hand toward him, palm facing upward. A soft hum filled the air, low and resonant, growing louder with each passing second. Tiny motes of light began to gather above her open hand, swirling together until they coalesced into a sphere of pure energy. It hovered there, crackling softly, casting eerie shadows across her face. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as desert sand. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not now. Humanity had prepared for countless scenarios during their expansion into the stars. Hostile environments, resource shortages, even primitive extraterrestrial life forms. But nothing had prepared them for her. Nothing could have. She wasn't just advanced, she was transcendent, a being who defied all logic and reason. And yet, here she was, standing before him, daring him to prove her wrong. His mind raced, searching desperately for some kind of advantage, some weakness he could exploit. But the longer he stared at her, the more futile that search became. There was no flaw in her posture, no hesitation in her movements, no flicker of doubt in her gaze. She was perfection incarnate, a storm wrapped in flesh and bone, and possibly something far stranger. For the first time in his life, he understood what true fear felt like. Not the fleeting panic of battle, not the gnawing anxiety of uncertainty, but the cold, suffocating realization that he was utterly outmatched. And still, she waited, patient and poised, her energy sphere glowing brighter with each passing moment. "Go ahead," she said finally, her voice dripping with mockery. "Show me what you're made of." The soldier's mind spiraled back to the day his battalion had first touched down on this desolate world, a barren expanse of jagged rocks and crimson skies. He remembered the initial thrill of discovery, the sense of stepping into the unknown, a frontier humanity had never dared to cross. The mission had been clear: establish contact, assess resources, and prepare for colonization. No one expected resistance, let alone confrontation. They had arrived armed with technology centuries ahead of Earth's previous capabilities, believing themselves untouchable. Hubris had blinded them all. Now, standing face to face with this alien warrior woman, he realized how hollow those assumptions had been. She loomed over him not merely as a physical threat but as a manifestation of everything humanity had failed to comprehend. Her very presence challenged everything he thought he knew about strength, survival, and dominance. Where humans relied on machinery, strategy, and brute force, she seemed to embody something far more intrinsic. Power drawn from within, raw and unfiltered. The energy sphere hovering above her hand pulsed erratically, its light casting strange patterns on the cracked earth around them. It was alive, sentient almost, reacting to her emotions or perhaps amplifying them. He wondered if it would consume him whole should she choose to unleash it. His own weapon, a sleek plasma rifle designed for maximum efficiency, felt laughably inadequate in comparison. Its weight in his hands was supposed to be reassuring, a reminder of human ingenuity and adaptability. Instead, it now seemed clumsy, primitive, a child's toy held up against the infinite complexity of her being. His finger twitched against the trigger, but he didn't dare fire. Something told him it wouldn't matter anyway. Her armor, or whatever passed for it, looked impenetrable, capable of deflecting any attack he could muster. Even if he managed to land a shot, she'd likely bat it away like an annoying insect. "You think your tools will save you?" she asked suddenly, breaking the oppressive silence. Her voice was softer now, almost contemplative, yet no less cutting. "Your machines, your weapons, they are extensions of your weakness, not your strength. You rely on them because you cannot stand alone." Her words struck a nerve, piercing deeper than any blade ever could. She wasn't just mocking him, she was dismantling him piece by piece, exposing vulnerabilities he hadn't even known existed. Was she right? Had humanity truly become so dependent on its creations that it had forgotten how to fight without them? He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to meet her gaze once more. Her silver eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity, as though she could see straight through his doubts and fears. "I've seen civilizations rise and fall," she continued, her tone shifting to something akin to pity. "Each one convinced of its own invincibility, each one undone by its hubris. Tell me, human, what makes you believe you'll fare any better?" He wanted to respond, to shout back at her, to defend himself and his species. But the words caught in his throat, tangled in a web of uncertainty and self-doubt. How could he argue when she spoke with such authority, such conviction? She didn't need to boast or exaggerate. Her mere existence was proof enough of her superiority. And yet, buried beneath the fear and awe, a spark of defiance flickered to life. Maybe she was stronger, faster, smarter, but she didn't understand him. She couldn't. She saw him as part of a collective, a cog in the machine of humanity, interchangeable and expendable. What she failed to grasp was that individuals mattered. That resilience wasn't measured solely by physical prowess or technological advancement. It was born in moments like this, when hope seemed lost and surrender felt inevitable. The energy sphere above her hand flared brighter, its light searing into his retinas. She raised it slightly, angling it toward him as though gauging his reaction. "I could end this now," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than any shout. "But where's the sport in that? Prove me wrong, human. Show me why your kind deserves to survive." Her challenge hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. For a moment, he considered lowering his weapon, accepting defeat before it came. After all, what chance did he really have? Then again, perhaps victory wasn't the point. Perhaps survival meant something different here, something less tangible but infinitely more valuable. Taking a deep breath, he steadied himself, his grip tightening on the rifle. If nothing else, he owed it to himself, and to humanity, to try. As the seconds stretched into an eternity, the alien warrior woman's stance shifted imperceptibly, her body language betraying a flicker of impatience. She had expected fear, perhaps even desperation, but not this stubborn refusal to yield. Humans were supposed to crumble under pressure, their fragile psyches unable to withstand the overwhelming presence of a superior being. Yet here he stood, trembling but resolute, his weapon still trained on her despite the futility of the gesture. Intriguing. Annoying. Fascinating. She tilted her head again, the motion fluid and deliberate, like a predator assessing its prey. Her silver eyes narrowed slightly, scrutinizing him with renewed intensity. "Why do you persist?" she asked, her tone laced with genuine curiosity. What drives you to cling to such a futile hope? Her question caught him off guard, forcing him to confront the turmoil raging within. Hope, that elusive, intangible force, was indeed what kept him standing. But it wasn't just hope for survival or victory. It was something deeper, something tied to the essence of what it meant to be human. It was the drive to push forward, to defy odds stacked impossibly high, to create meaning even in the face of annihilation. To her, it might seem irrational, even pathetic, but to him, it was everything. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice hoarse but steady. "Maybe it's because I have to. Because giving up, that's not who we are." Her expression softened, just barely, as though his words had struck a chord she hadn't anticipated. For a fraction of a second, he glimpsed something behind her cold facade, something ancient, weary, and profoundly lonely. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual mask of detached superiority. "Sentimentality," she murmured, almost to herself. How quaint. But there was no mockery in her tone now, only a faint note of melancholy that made his chest tighten. Was it possible that beneath her unshakable confidence lay a void she sought to fill? Could it be that her challenges, her provocations, were not acts of cruelty but cries for connection? The thought unsettled him, complicating the already precarious dynamic between them. She was no longer just an adversary. She was a puzzle, a riddle wrapped in layers of enigma. "You speak of hope," she said after a pause, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. "Yet hope is fleeting. Fragile. It cannot sustain you forever." She gestured vaguely with one hand, the energy sphere shrinking slightly as though mirroring her mood. "Tell me, human, what happens when hope fails? When all paths lead to ruin?" He hesitated, unsure how to respond. Her questions cut too close to truths he preferred to avoid, the inevitability of failure, the crushing weight of despair. Yet somehow, he found himself answering, his words spilling out before he could stop them. "Then we rebuild. We start over. We find new reasons to keep going. That's what humans do. We adapt, we endure, we evolve. Even when everything tells us to stop, we don't." For a moment, she simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a sound rich and melodic, yet tinged with bitterness. "Adaptation," she echoed, shaking her head. "Is that what you call it? Or is it denial? Refusal to accept the truth of your insignificance in the grand scheme of things?" Her words stung, not because they were cruel but because they hit uncomfortably close to home. In the vastness of the universe, humanity was indeed small, insignificant, a mere blip on the cosmic radar. And yet, wasn't that precisely what made their struggles meaningful? Their fragility gave their triumphs weight, their mortality lent urgency to their dreams. To deny that was to deny the very essence of existence. Before he could articulate these thoughts, she moved suddenly, closing the distance between them in a single fluid stride. Her presence loomed over him, engulfing him in waves of heat and energy. The sphere in her hand dimmed further, its glow reduced to a faint pulse. "You fascinate me, human," she whispered, her voice almost tender. "Not because of your strength, but because of your persistence. Your refusal to bow to inevitability." He met her gaze, unflinching despite the storm brewing within him. "Maybe that's why we're still here," he replied softly. "Because we refuse to believe inevitability has the final say." Her lips parted as though to respond, but no words came. Instead, she stepped back, creating space between them once more. The energy sphere brightened again, though its light now seemed less menacing, more contemplative. Whatever she had intended to say remained unspoken, hanging in the charged air like a half-formed thought. For the first time since their encounter began, he sensed a shift, not in her demeanor, but in the balance of power. She still held all the cards, but the game itself had changed. "Very well," she said finally, her voice regaining its edge. "Let us see how far your persistence takes you." With that, she raised the sphere high above her head, its light erupting into a blinding cascade that illuminated the entire battlefield. Shadows danced wildly, distorting reality itself as the ground trembled beneath their feet. When the glare subsided, she was gone, leaving only silence, and the lingering echo of her challenge. The soldier stumbled backward, his knees buckling as the full weight of what had transpired crashed over him like a tidal wave. The battlefield, once stark and barren, now felt suffocating, its oppressive emptiness magnified by the absence of her towering presence. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, each inhalation burning like fire as the adrenaline coursing through his veins began to ebb. She was gone, yet her words lingered, etched into the fabric of his mind like scars. Let us see how far your persistence takes you. Had he won? Lost? Survived? None of those terms seemed adequate to describe what had just happened. Victory implied triumph, but there had been no decisive blow, no moment of catharsis. Defeat suggested submission, yet she had vanished without delivering the killing stroke. Survival implied endurance, but he wasn't sure he could claim even that much. All he knew was that he was still standing, and that, somehow, felt monumental. Lowering his weapon, he allowed himself a moment to process the surreal encounter. His hands trembled as he ran them through his sweat-soaked hair, streaks of dirt smudging across his forehead. Everything about her defied explanation, her power, her poise, her cryptic words. She wasn't just an adversary, she was a paradox, a being who embodied contradictions he couldn't reconcile. Strength and vulnerability. Superiority and loneliness. Certainty and doubt. The more he thought about her, the more elusive she became, slipping through the cracks of understanding like water through fingers. And then there was the question of purpose. Why had she come? What did she want from him, or from humanity? Her actions suggested a test, a gauntlet thrown down to measure their worth. But worth according to what standard? Her cryptic musings about adaptation and insignificance hinted at something deeper, a philosophical inquiry masquerading as combat. Was she seeking answers, or was she trying to impart them? The ambiguity gnawed at him, refusing to let go. His gaze drifted downward to the scorched patch of earth where she had stood moments ago. The ground bore no visible marks, no evidence of the energy sphere's brilliance or the seismic tremors it had unleashed. Yet he could feel it. The residual charge in the air, the faint hum of displaced particles settling back into place. It was as though the land itself remembered her, holding on to fragments of her essence long after she had departed. A sudden gust of wind swept across the battlefield, carrying with it a fine layer of crimson dust that stung his eyes and clung to his uniform. Blinking rapidly, he turned toward the horizon, where the red sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the jagged terrain. Time was slipping away, and with it, clarity. He needed to regroup, to report back to command, to make sense of what had happened. But part of him resisted the idea, clinging to the raw immediacy of the moment. Leaving this place felt like abandoning something vital, as though walking away would sever a thread connecting him to truths he hadn't yet unraveled. He glanced at his rifle, its sleek metallic surface dulled by a thin film of grit. It felt heavier now, burdened by the knowledge that it represented not strength but limitation. Against her, it had been nothing more than a symbol, a relic of humanity's misplaced confidence. What good was technology when faced with a force that transcended it entirely? The thought unsettled him, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable possibility that humanity's greatest asset might also be its greatest liability. Progress, innovation, ingenuity, all these things were meaningless if they failed to address the fundamental questions of existence. Questions she had posed so effortlessly, so merciless her figure faded further into memory. The soldier realized that their encounter had left him with more questions than answers. Who was she, truly? A guardian of some cosmic order, testing lesser beings for reasons unknown? A rogue agent, operating outside the constraints of her own kind? Or simply a wanderer, driven by curiosity and a desire to understand those who inhabited the same universe as she did? Each possibility seemed equally plausible and equally inadequate, leaving him adrift in a sea of speculation. Her disappearance had been as abrupt as her arrival, vanishing into thin air without so much as a ripple to mark her passage. Yet the battlefield remained altered, not in its physical state but in the atmosphere that clung to it. The air felt charged, alive with an energy that prickled against his skin and sent shivers racing down his spine. It was as though she had left behind a fragment of herself, an imprint of her presence that refused to dissipate. Every step he took echoed unnaturally loud, reverberating through the silence like a drumbeat heralding doom. The weight of isolation pressed down on him, heavier than ever before. For all his training, for all the camaraderie shared among his fellow soldiers, he had never felt so profoundly alone. His companions were miles away, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded here. Would they believe him if he told them? Could he even put it into words without sounding like a madman? The alien warrior woman had transcended explanation, existing on a plane where language faltered and logic crumbled. Trying to convey her essence to others felt futile, like attempting to capture the ocean in a teacup. And yet, amidst the confusion and dread, a peculiar sensation began to take root within him. It started as a faint stirring, a whisper of recognition that grew louder with each passing moment. She had challenged him, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. She had forced him to confront his fears, his doubts, his insecurities. She had peeled back layers of bravado and false certainty, exposing the fragile core beneath. But instead of leaving him broken, she had ignited something unexpected, a spark of resolve. It wasn't defiance, exactly, nor was it hope in the conventional sense. It was something quieter, more enduring. A quiet determination to rise above the limitations she had so ruthlessly exposed. To prove, not to her, but to himself, that humanity's flaws were not fatal weaknesses but opportunities for growth. That persistence, as she had called it, was not naivety but resilience. That insignificance, far from being a death sentence, was an invitation to create significance. The realization brought a strange calm, washing over him like cool water after days in the desert. He straightened his posture, lifting his chin despite the exhaustion dragging at his limbs. The battlefield stretched out before him, vast and unforgiving, but no longer did it seem insurmountable. Somewhere beyond the jagged peaks and endless plains lay answers, perhaps not to the questions she had posed, but to the ones that mattered most. Who were they, as a species? What did they value? What legacy would they leave behind? With deliberate steps, he began making his way back toward the rendezvous point, his rifle slung loosely over one shoulder. The journey would be long, arduous, and fraught with uncertainty. But for the first time since setting foot on this alien world, he felt ready to face it. Ready to embrace the unknown, to grapple with the mysteries it held, to carve out a path where none existed before. As the soldier trudged across the crimson wasteland, his thoughts churned with a mix of resolve and unease. The alien warrior woman's absence loomed larger than her presence ever had, her cryptic words echoing in his mind like a haunting refrain. He replayed their encounter over and over, dissecting every gesture, every syllable, searching for hidden meaning. But no matter how hard he tried, one question gnawed at him. Why had she left without finishing what she started? It didn't make sense. Her superiority was absolute, her disdain palpable. So why let him live? The answer came not as clarity but as chaos. A sudden tremor rippled through the ground beneath his boots, throwing him off balance. Instinctively, he reached for his rifle, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. At first, there was nothing, just the endless expanse of jagged rocks and swirling dust. Then, from the corner of his eye, he caught movement. Shadows danced unnaturally against the blood-red sky, shifting shapes that seemed to defy physics. They coalesced into forms, humanoid yet grotesque, their limbs elongated and angular, their faces featureless save for glowing fissures where eyes should have been. His breath hitched as realization dawned. These weren't natural beings. They were constructs, phantoms conjured by some unseen force. And they were coming for him. The first shadow lunged, its form solidifying into something tangible just inches from his chest. Adrenaline surged through him as he fired, the plasma bolt striking true and disintegrating the creature in a flash of light. But before he could celebrate, two more took its place, then 4, then 8. They multiplied exponentially, swarming around him like insects drawn to flame. Each shot connected, each enemy fell, but they kept coming, relentless and unyielding. Panic clawed at his throat as the truth sank in. This wasn't a battle he could win. Every shot drained his weapon's power core, and every second brought more enemies pouring out of the ether. Desperation drove him backward, step by agonizing step, until his back hit something solid, a towering rock formation jutting out of the earth like a broken tooth. Trapped. Then, just as hope began to slip away, the shadows froze mid-motion. Their glowing fissures dimmed, and an eerie silence descended upon the battlefield. For a moment, All was still. And then she appeared. The alien warrior woman materialized atop the ridge above him, silhouetted against the dying sun. Her expression was unreadable, her posture relaxed, but the energy sphere in her hand pulsed with renewed intensity. She raised it high, bathing the battlefield in its radiant glow, and with a single word, sharp and commanding, the shadows dissolved into nothingness. He stared up at her, his heart pounding wildly. Was this mercy? Or another test? You survived, she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of both approval and disappointment. But survival is not enough. Before he could respond, she leapt down from the ridge, landing gracefully before him. Up close, her presence was even more overwhelming, her aura radiating waves of heat and electricity that made his skin prickle. She tilted her head, studying him with those piercing silver eyes, as though trying to decipher some invisible code written into his very soul. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to sound defiant. "Why are you doing this?" Her lips curled into a faint smile, equal parts amusement and pity. "What I want is irrelevant," she replied. "What matters is what you choose to do next. You see, human, your species has always misunderstood strength. You equate it with conquest, with domination. But true strength lies in understanding, not just of others, but of yourself." She stepped closer, her gaze boring into him like a drill. "I have shown you fear. I have tested your resolve. Now, tell me, what will you do with the knowledge you've gained?" Her words struck a nerve, cutting deeper than any blade. Knowledge, yes, he had gained it, painfully and unwillingly. Fear, doubt, inadequacy, all laid bare under her merciless scrutiny. But what good was knowledge without action? Without purpose? "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I won't give up." For the first time since their encounter began, her mask of detachment cracked. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, something akin to admiration, or perhaps regret. She nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, as though acknowledging a truth she hadn't expected to hear. "Good," she said softly, "because the real challenge begins now." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone once more. But this time, she didn't vanish entirely. Instead, her figure shimmered, becoming translucent, spectral. As she moved further away, the landscape around him began to shift, twisting and warping like a reflection in rippling water. The jagged rocks melted into smooth curves, the crimson sky darkened to midnight blue, and the oppressive heat gave way to a cool, biting wind. When the transformation completed, he found himself standing on an entirely different battlefield, one far more familiar. Rows of human soldiers lined the horizon, their weapons trained on him. Behind them stood towering machines of war, their metallic surfaces gleaming ominously under the pale moonlight. His comrades, or so they appeared. But something about them felt wrong. "Fire!" came the command, sharp and authoritative. Time slowed to a crawl as the first volley of shots tore through the air. Reflexes honed by years of training kicked in, and he dove for cover behind a nearby boulder. Plasma bolts seared the ground where he had stood moments ago, sending shards of stone flying in all directions. Heart racing, he peered around the edge of his makeshift shelter, trying to make sense of the situation. These weren't ordinary soldiers. Their movements were too precise, too synchronized, as though guided by a single mind. Their expressions were blank, devoid of individuality or emotion. And their eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the shadow creatures from before. A cold realization settled over him. This wasn't real, or at least, not entirely. It was another test, crafted by the alien warrior woman to push him to his limits. But if that was true, then who was controlling these soldiers? What did they represent? The answer hit him like a freight train. They were manifestations of his own doubts, his fears, his insecurities. Everything she had exposed during their earlier encounter had taken physical form, arrayed against him in a final trial. He clenched his fists, determination burning brighter than ever. If this was truly a test of self-understanding, then the only way forward was through. Not by fighting blindly, but by confronting the truths he had spent his life running from. Rising to his feet, he stepped out from behind the boulder, arms raised in surrender. The soldiers hesitated, their weapons wavering slightly as though confused by his lack of resistance. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "You're just echoes, remnants of my past, my mistakes, my failures. And I won't let you define me anymore." The soldiers faltered, their forms flickering like static on a screen. One by one, they collapsed into pools of shadow, dissolving into the ether just as the earlier creatures had. When the last one vanished, silence fell once more. But the alien warrior woman was nowhere to be seen. Instead, standing in her place was a figure cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by a hooded robe. Its presence was suffocating, radiating an aura of ancient malice that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "So," it rasped, its voice low and guttural, "you think you've conquered your fears? How quaint." The soldier swallowed hard, gripping his rifle tighter. Whatever this new entity was, it wasn't part of her game, it was something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. And it was only getting started.